Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto was a hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. As the cloud of dust and Ryatsu settled, the hollows in the vicinity managed to find their way to their feet, despite the fact that there was now a heavy blanket of strong Ryatsu covering the entire atmosphere, making it difficult for them to breathe. Sale felt a bead of sweat run down underneath his mask, and took in the full sight. There was nothing quite like the sight of seeing a hollow evolve into a greater being, and it was no different for Naruto's evolution, which was magnified to a greater scale. The torrent that had surrounded him was palpable, even as it faded. The silhouette in the middle seemed to be in the process of morphing, as the figure's canine visage became more humanoid. His mask was starting to crack and eventually fell off, save for a few fragments that couldn't be made out in the dim light. His tails disappeared into his backside, his arms and legs became thinner, and he got ever so slightly shorter. The figure grinned psychotically, showing white teeth. White, human teeth unlike the razor-sharp fox canines that littered his mouth before. He released his Ryatsu somewhat, finding it was a little difficult to control. The cloud of dust settled completely, and Sale feasted his eyes on the new and improved emperor. The newly nude human walked up the stairs to the balcony, casually grabbing one of the plain, brown robes meant for new Arrancar. He wobbled slightly, being slightly unused to the human body, but he clenched his feet and released his Ryatsu again, feeling the power well up inside him. He grinned wickedly, letting out a throaty snicker that soon turned into full-blown laughter. He swung his arms from side to side, his subjects looking slightly uncomfortable at the maniacal laughter. "Naruto-sama, are you alright?" Sale asked tentatively, taking in his king's new appearance. He was around 5.5 feet tall, making him quite a short Arrancar. Being garbed in a simple brown robe, he looked the very picture of a common Arrancar, but the confidence and Ryatsu he exuded gave off a presence of someone much higher. He left his robe open slightly at the collar, exposing his massive hollow hole, which curiously had remained over his heart instead of moving to another part of his body. His face was very boyish, a fact which surprised many of the hollows down there. He didn't look a day over 16, which just went to show that he hadn't aged a day from the time of his death. However, despite the fact that he didn't look older, there were still several differences on his face. His mask had broken into fragments, a given for a new Arrancar. The mask began with two very short pointed ears directly above his human ones, which rested against his temples. The mask continued to the side, arching around his eyebrows and curling underneath his eyes to a sharp point just below his bottom eyelid. His astigma took on the form of the whisker marks he had in life, yet this time they were blood red in color and almost looked like they were some type of war paint, which complemented his mask and almost gave him a sort of tribal vibe. His eyes were a deep scarlet red, and they were slanted slightly, giving some more remnants of his vulpine appearance from before. His hair was the same blonde spikes he had as a human. The new being looked so much like a human, but the reality was he was absolutely not a human. He wasn't even a Shinigami. He was an Arrancar. The other hollows in the room seemed to back away from him slowly, but Sale had enough courage to approach him immediately. The worm hollow reached out a tendril and touched Naruto's shoulder, which drew the Emperor's attention away from his new body. "Naruto-sama, I am pleased to announce that the operation was a complete success. You have now been officially Arrancarized underneath the context of El Libro de Ciclos. But that's not all, your Zanpakuto is forming on the operating table below," the head scientist said. Naruto hummed lightly. "A Zanpakuto, eh? One of those swords the damnable Shinigami carry around. Come to think of it, this new body is a little too human-like for my tastes, it reminds me of how much I hate them. But, if it will help me gain more power, then the Arrancarization will definitely be worth it in the end," Naruto mused, walking down the steps, where he saw a sheathed sword materializing into existence on a pedestal next to where he was operated on. He grabbed the sword once it had finished materializing. He drew the Zanpakuto from its sheath, scrutinizing the weapon carefully. It didn't seem to be very similar to the katanas that the shinobi used. It was wider, and with the slight curve in the silver-bladed edge, Naruto realized that his weapon resembled a cutlass. Naruto mused that maybe the shape had something to do with the twisted and curved nature of his soul, but dismissed that as nothing more than lame symbolism. The blade gleamed in the dark, and Naruto's eyes were drawn towards the base. The hilt and guard of the Zanpakuto lacked the basket shape characteristic of cutlasses. Instead, they were both red in color, with two extensions curving out of the guard and into the hilt like foxtails, coming together to form a rough heart shape. I think I like it," Naruto said, fastening the Zanpakuto on his hip and walking up to join Sale again. The Arrancar Zanpakuto works a little differently than the Shinigami Zanpakuto, Naruto-sama. Whereas the Shinigami Zanpakuto is the manifestation of that Shinigami's soul, the Arrancar Zanpakuto is the nuclei of your hollow abilities sealed within a sword. When you release said sword, you'll regain your true form. Sale explained. Good job on this recent assignment. Since the success of the Arrancarization, things have been coming along smoothly, if not a little slow. As for the other part, the part involved with the main plan, I would like you to show me the new bracelets, he said. Of course, Naruto-sama. They are completely ready. You have ordered the creation almost 100,000 of those, correct? They are currently being stored in the research vault. However, I could take you down to the main lab, where I can show you the basics of how one works, Sale said. When Naruto nodded, Sale ordered Verona to open the elevator. He gestured for his king to enter, which the new Arrancar did after being followed by his head scientist. As you have ordered, these bracelets are the pinnacle of how this plan works. He explained in the elevator's shaft, but was cut off as the elevator stopped and the door flung open. The Arrancar and the Hollow were now on the first sublevel, the main lab where several Hollow and Arrancar scientists were toiling away at whatever nasty research they were doing. At the center of the room, there was a bracelet on display in a case, which was clearly meant to be fit on a human wrist. Naruto smiled when he saw the handiwork of his scientists on display. It has taken us so long to develop this incredible piece of technology. I won't bore you with technical details, but what it is in a nutshell is a miniaturization of the Shinigami's Dangai. It can convert human cells into spirit particles, allowing them to enter soul society, or in this case Huecomundo, when the bracelet is worn by the human in question. Brilliant, Sale, brilliant. Naruto commended, his voice now seeming to moan in ecstasy at the mere thought of such power in their control now. What about the other crucial part of the plan, he asked. That's the more difficult part of this, Naruto-sama. Although, we have perfected the technology needed to send humans into Huecomundo, we have not yet managed to stabilize a large enough Garganta to hold an entire village. The most we have achieved is the size of about a house, said Sale. Well, keep working on it, then. Since everything else is complete, you can devote all of your time to completion of this one final project. Once you complete the stabilization of the Garganta, the operation is a go. Report to me immediately when your research is complete. You are to accompany me to the human world, and when the operation is complete, you are to be delegated to sublevel 14 of the Institute. Do I make myself clear? Naruto ordered. Sale's eyes widened underneath his mask. Naruto-sama. You are... He stuttered. Naruto grinned evilly. That's right, Sale. This is going to be your field day, he said, to which Sale leveled a grin just as twisted as his king's. So, they've finally managed to stabilize that Garganta, then? Asked Naruto towards the messenger Sale had sent. The messenger saluted, confirming the statement. Yes, sir. With the combination of the Dangai bracelets as well as the stabilization of the giant Garganta that can carry an entire village, the orders you gave us all those years ago are finally complete. We are prepared to begin the operation at any time you wish, Naruto-sama. Naruto smiled cruelly, dismissing the guard before turning back to his throne. He charged the panel on the left side of his throne, allowing the screen which he used to communicate messages throughout the kingdom. Attention Ulquiorra, Neutra, Grimjow, and Sale. Report to the main throne room immediately for a strategic war session. This is mandatory," he ordered, making sure the message reached the 4 hollows in question. In time, 4 Arrancar walked into the throne room. In the 15 years since he had become an Arrancar, all 4 of his generals and his head scientist had followed. Ulquiorra and Haribel were able to rise to low-level Vasto Lordes before they evolved, but Sail, Neutra, and Grimjow all failed to achieve the Vasto Lorde status, instead settling to become very high-level Ajuchas Arrancar. About 5 minutes later, the first arrival appeared in the form of Naruto's right-hand man himself. Ulquiorra had changed from the stoic Bat Hollow to a stoic Arrancar. He was around the same height as Naruto, with almost albino skin, and slick black hair that reached his neck. He wore a brown robe like his king, and his mask fragments were a helmet that was split in half. Ulquiorra was silent as he entered the room, but it instantly became loud as the second and third arrivals got there. The first of them was a blue-haired Arrancar with a cat-like face, and a line of teeth on his right jaw. The next one was an extremely tall Arrancar with long black hair, a slanted face, and an eye patch. His signature side-like Zanpakuto was missing. The last arrival came in 10 minutes later, an effeminate pink-haired Arrancar with hollow mask glasses and an almost seductive look on his face. He sauntered in after bowing to Naruto. "Good, we're all here," Naruto said, satisfied. "What about Haribel?" Grimjow piped up, noticing the lack of the only high-ranked female. Naruto shook his head. "This entire process is going to be far too grisly for her to handle, so she's going to sit this one out. I can't have her thinking I'm anything less than the perfect messiah, now can I? She's just sitting in her chamber, worrying her pretty little head over something I set her on for the next few months," he said. "Anyway, she's not important right now. The essential thing right now is that all the preparations for the plan have been completed. The village itself won't be any threat to us, but we need to get in there and get out quickly before a Shinigami captain shows up," he said. "Why? Any one of us could take on a captain, easily," said Grimjow cockily, grinning at the prospect of a new fight. "Don't underestimate the fighting power of a captain, Grimjow. And, it's not too much about a captain, really. With a force of hollows this big coming to that continent, we could easily have the whole of Soul Society on us if we're not careful. And, as much as I hate to admit it, we're really not ready to handle them yet." Naruto seethed, hissing out the last part in anger. "Understood, what do we need to do, Naruto?" Ulquiorra asked. He didn't seem to be too concerned about any of this, though Naruto supposed that was to be expected. "Here, follow me to the back of the room and we'll discuss our course of action," he said, leading the 4 other hollows up to this large table opposite from his throne. There seemed to be a map pinned down upon it. The logo of the Reno Animals Science Institution was printed in the bottom corner. "This is the updated map of Konoha that the institution has drafted for me recently. It is a moderately sized village, and a surprisingly small capital for an empire of Konoha's scale. It is my home village from when I was still a human, and a breeding ground for corruption. The village is ruled by a Hokage, the strongest shinobi, not to mention all the ninja they have in the village. However, with the might of our forces, the ninja won't be any trouble. What really worries me is the Shinigami, like I said earlier. We need to be in and out of this village in 20 minutes, tops. That's why I'm pulling out the big guns for this operation," Naruto said. He placed attack on the Hokage mansion, while he placed several more at 16 different points around the outskirts of the village. "I'll be the one to capture the Hokage. Ulquiorra, Grimjow, Neutra, the 16 yellow tacks you see represent the Garganta from where our forces will enter the village. You know what to do from there. Sail, your role has changed these past few years. Instead of accompanying me personally, I want you to stay here and personally supervise the configuration of the giant Garganta. Make sure you link the main database to a position where you can see us. When we are finished in the village, we will send up a flare to personally notify you to the configurations," he ordered, to which Sail understood. "Sounds simple enough," he remarked. "The plan itself is unfailingly simple. It was the technology we needed that took up all this time. Naruto replied. The rest of you get to your positions and rally the forces. Sail, I expect the shipments of bracelets to the docking zone. We will depart for the human world in 5 days. He ordered to the rest of them. The 4 responded without question to their orders. When the 4 went their separate ways to prepare, Naruto sat on his throne, grinning. This will be fun. 15-year-old Shimura Kanahaji was the most talented prodigy that Konohagakure no Sato had ever seen. Her natural talent, coupled with her love of the village and sheer willpower, as well as the superior genetics she had received by being part of the Shimura clan. She had completely mastered the usage of the Kyuubi's chakra, being able to call on all 9 tails, blowing her father's previous record of 6 tails out of the water by far. She had long surpassed him anyway, and would continue to grow into probably the finest Hokage in existence, for she was guaranteed to be next in line. Right now, she was walking through the clean streets of the village, smiling at all the happy people who went about their daily lives. Truly, their village, no, their empire was a wonderful place. But, she had other concerns to worry about. She was going to meet her friends at the original Ichiraka ramen stand, which had long grown into a chain that had spread throughout the empire. She had heard that originally the chain was just that tiny stand who made a modest business over 200 years ago during the reign of the Sandaime. That was unbelievable for one thing, but she supposed it was similar to how all the clans had survived throughout the years. Hey, Kanahaji, you're here, shouted a loud boisterous voice, as a feral 15-year-old walked out of the stand she had just arrived at. Inuzuka Nikukyu looked remarkably like his distant ancestor, down to the voice. Out of all the clans, the Inuzukas were probably the ones that benefited the most out of the Kyuubi's chakra. Their canine-like speed, nose, and strength were only boosted more. Kanahaji smiled softly, and laughed lightly, a gentle tinkle which made the Inuzuka blush slightly. Hey, Nikukyu. You're looking well, she commented. Not as good as you're looking, Kanahaji. 15 years old and already the strongest in the entire village. I hear your dad might even retire soon, and you might be made Hokage sooner than expected. We'll see, dog breath. We'll see, she laughed again, and walked into the restaurant, where she saw that 5 of her other friends had already arrived. Aburame Shini, Narare, Hyuga Haruna, Akimichi Chouma, and Yamanaka Inos. All 5 of them turned towards her with smiles on their faces, though it was hard to with Shini and his high collar and jacket. She took a seat at their table next to Rei and waved when the smiling waitress gave her a menu. So, how have you all been? She asked, ordering up a few bowls of miso ramen. Could be better. We were gone on a mission to the former Tsuchi no Kuni in order to suppress a rebellion against the empire. It was a pain, to say the least, Rei drawled. The always deadpan expression on her face made her look far plainer than she actually was. I wouldn't say that, Rei. You need to be more motivated for missions. Came a suave, silky voice. The handsome Yamanaka Inos threw back his long hair, and locked eyes with his teammate. Whatever. Maybe I'll become more motivated when a certain someone takes over as Hokage. The female Nara said, looking at Kanahaji, who blushed after being put on the spot. I told you before. Food's here, shouted Chouma, and Akimichi even bigger than the ones from Naruto's time. Indeed, he had gone and ordered himself at least 10 bowls before Kanahaji had even arrived, which explained why he had gotten his food so quickly. Rei sighed. Chouma, you just couldn't wait until Kanahaji arrived before you got your food, could you? She asked rhetorically, to which Chouma looked up from his bowl and stared at her intently. When you're in a restaurant, waiting is for the weak. No exceptions. He said shortly, before returned to his bowl, allowing everyone there to contemplate just how that made sense. The group remained silent, and all that could be heard was the slurping and munching of Chuma's eating. Kanahaji enjoyed the peace and quiet a little bit, but she hoped there was more to talk about within their little group. She raised the glass of water to her lips. She was cut off, as the air around her became unbearably heavy, like she was being suffocated. The glass slipped from her hands and shattered into a million pieces upon the floor. She looked up to see that the atmosphere itself seemed to be heavily distorted due to the intense pressure. Her friends seemed to be affected the same way she was, and the other patrons were doing even worse, several of them on their knees panting for breath. What in the hell is this? I've never felt anything like it. It's almost like it's from out of this world. She panted. Her friends looked at her warily, as if something that could make her afraid is something they would not want to tangle. Haruki burst into tears, the powerful pressure finally forcing her to her knees. Kanahaji attempted to place a reassuring hand upon her shoulder, but she couldn't get it up, and she too collapsed onto the floor and began choking. The others followed her soon after. After nearly a minute of choking, Kanahaji forced herself to her feet. She darted in the direction of the door, looking back to see her friends' pleading glances. Kanahaji! Ray croaked out. Come on guys, you need to pull yourselves together. We might be under attack, she screeched at them. It seemed an entirely foreign thought. Who would dare attack the great village of Konoha? It was the linchpin of the great empire that controlled the entire continent. Attacking it was blasphemy, and every citizen in the empire knew it. She smiled when her friends pulled themselves to their feet, some struggling more than others. Come on, we've got to find my father, she ordered, to which her friends followed her out of the restaurant and into the village. The sight that met their eyes was like something they couldn't even comprehend. Ah, the fresh smell of Konoha. There's nothing like it. I don't think I've ever smelled anything that's made me this sick before. Naruto mused to himself, as he stepped out of the Garganta hovering over the village. The wind rustled through the Arrancar's hair, as he took a deep breath and surveyed the village. He was hanging out in mid-air, watching the sheep as they plodded through the daily lives without a care in the world. They had no idea what was about to happen to them, and the thought of that only made Naruto giddier. Surely, the ability to snuff out life so easily, without them even knowing, made him truly sublime. He heard the distant whirring noise of opening Garganta, seeing the black voids open on the outside perimeters of the village. After they fully opening, thousands of hollows poured from the portals. Most of them seemed to release their Ryatsu, creating a waft of the pressure that surrounded the village, and made the villagers and shinobi alike collapse. He spotted a few Shinigami that were patrolling the village. They had taken notice of the Gargantas, and the hollows that were pouring out of them. Their mouths were agape, and they seemed to be in too much shock to do anything productive. All the more advantage for him, Naruto supposed. A slightly larger Garganta opened about 100 feet above him, and from it poured this sort of blue Ryatsu. It blanketed the village before spreading towards the perimeter where the other Garganta were. It rose in the air, creating a force field of energy around the village. Looks like sale has started. That force field of Ryatsu will make us visible to the humans. Look like everything's going according to plan so far. Naruto mused. He looked over and spotted the Hokage mansion. It seemed to remain untouched after all these years. The Hokage would be there, most likely, so Naruto would head there while his army dealt with the rest of the village. They had their orders. Speaking of the village, all of them seemed to have noticed the portals opening, and were staring in perplexity at the voids, until that confusion turned to terror as the first wave of hollows began to rush in the village. Naruto stepped into the direction of the Hokage mansion, hoping that the Hokage himself would have taken notice by the time he got there. He opened his robe slightly, showing about 10 dungai bracelets attached to his belt buckle. Well, looks like it's about time to get started. Panic flooded the village as its citizens laid their eyes upon what could only be creatures from some sort of twisted nightmare. That pressure they were exuding was unnatural, and there were so many of them. No one seemed to know where they were coming from. Loathsome creatures, every last one of them. Some were big, some were small, but the fact of the matter is that they all were repulsive. Lewd, warped beings that were covered in these strange masks for which evil, black eyes lay underneath. These eyes seemed to be filled with nothing more than the desire to destroy humans. Some had long, cruel claws meant for nothing more than evisceration. Some had long, wiry limbs, and some were completely alien in nature, different from anything the people had ever seen before. These ones were the most disgusting of the bunch, as they often oozed a horrible green liquid from oversized, gangrenous pores while they drooled a filthy acidic liquid, or they had many disproportional limbs in the wrong places. They poured into the village, letting loose their unnatural cries. Moan, wail, and shriek they did, but what made the villagers' hair stand on end was purely, unnatural roar that the creatures made. The villagers of Konoha dropped whatever they were holding at the moment, stopped to stare in horror at the army of these foul creatures that began to pour into their beloved village at an almost impossible rate. A few babies wailed in anguish, children screamed in terror, but they were ignored by the shell-shocked citizens. It was at that point that the citizens of Konoha dissolved into their baser instincts. Many of them screamed and ran, their fight-or-flight responses working way overdrive on flight, while they searched in any direction to find an escape route out of the village. The shinobi, much more experienced with seeing and dealing with such things, were not panicking, but even they felt themselves strangely fearful of the new beings. They tried to maintain order within the village, but the hollow's incredibly sudden appearance had rendered their efforts useless. There were simply too many people panicking to organize an orderly evacuation, and the hollows were beginning to attack the civilians. One shinobi winced as a poor old woman was attacked by one of the twisted creatures. It easily hoisted her into the air screaming, purposefully applying enough pressure to make her bones snap. She wailed in torment, as the hollow continued to stomp on the broken arm until it was a bruised, broken mess that was pointed at an unnatural angle. To add fuel to the fire, the hollow pulled this strange bracelet out of the nowhere, and attached it to the old woman's broken arm. The shinobi wondered about the purpose of the bracelet, but they had a feeling it couldn't be anything good. The only thing to do now was organize a counterattack on the creatures, though without their Hokage's guidance it would disorganized at best. Nevertheless, a few shinobi teams had taken to the forefront, while others attempted to corral the citizens or find safety for themselves. The Shinigami patrolling the village had known about the invasion long before the shinobi did. It all began when a new Shinigami recruit received a signal from the Soul Society. With a lazy grin, he opened his spirit phone to glance at his radar, and was floored when a beam of red stared back at him through the phone. It vibrated for a few seconds before it actually exploded due to overheat, leaving the stunned and confused Shinigami without a beeline on the hollows. It turns out he didn't have to wait long to find them. "What the hell?" he said as he turned around and saw the massive flood of hollows pouring through the village gates. His breath caught in his throat at the wave of hollows, and their brutality towards the hapless citizens of Konoha. Many of them were menos grande. "This can't be possible," he murmured, fear gripping his heart in its icy grip. His body didn't respond to his mind telling him to run, and he stood rooted to the spot. "Backup, we need backup. Do we even have enough backup for this?" he asked himself frantically, beginning to suffocate on the ryatsu that was being emitted from the collective hollow force. There were only 15 Shinigami in the village at the time, and their communicators may have short-circuited from the ryatsu. He hoped they would be able to call in Soul Society and get a captain here, pronto. But he knew in his heart that just one captain wouldn't be able to put a stop to all this. As for right now, he needed to fight. He drew his Zanpakuto and faced the swarm of hollows, though something was strangely off about them that the Shinigami couldn't understand. This isn't normal hollow behavior at all, he thought to himself. The hollows should be devouring humans on the spot, but not a single one of them was doing that, surprisingly. Instead, they were carrying these strange bracelets, and were going around the village attaching them to whatever human they could find. Men, women, children, the elderly. It seemed that not a single human was spared from the hollow's agenda. The bracelets seemed to immediately knock out the humans, rendering them helpless to be taken. But even when unconscious, the hollows did not eat them. "I have to do something," he said, trying to spring into action against the closest hollows he could find. He was gutted by a wiry limb before he could even reach them, his Zanpakuto falling to his side uselessly. As the Shinigami died, he saw the shinobi of the village spring into action against the hollows, despite how little of a chance they actually had. Why they were doing that and not trying to escape, the Shinigami didn't know. Wait, the humans, can they see the hollows? Those were the Shinigami's last thoughts as he died. Kanahaji gasped as she exited the ramen stand, and feasted her eyes upon the things that were ravaging her village. She gasped a second time as a Shinobi team activated their fox cloaks and rushed after a group of about 20 of the creatures, while a Jonin seemed to be rushing towards a wave of the creatures that appeared to be doing something to the civilians. She didn't know what was more alarming. The fact that her comrades were fighting what appeared to be creatures from a child's nightmare, or that the famed Kyubi chakra that had been so effective and reliable for them in the past failed to harm the beings. A million thoughts ran through her mind at that moment, and she was quickly being overwhelmed and would lose the ability to think rationally. Should she just in the fray against these creatures, or should she rescue the helpless civilians? It seemed like the Shinobi needed rescuing as well, as she saw a group of ANBU get chained by a swarm of the creatures, their abilities useless against the creatures. Father. I've got to find my father. He'll know what to do here, he'll know how to repel these monsters. She thought to herself, hiding in the shadows as one of the creatures passed her by, chasing after an escaping middle-aged man. Fortunately, they didn't seem to be that intelligent. She almost screamed with fright as she felt a tap on her shoulder, before mentally cursing herself. Did the stress of the situation really make her lose track of the most basic of ninja skills? She turned to confront the monsters, her Kyubi chakra rising to the occasion, but it plummeted when she saw that it was her friends who had approached her. Rei grasped her shoulders lightly, sensing her friend's agitation. Kanahaji, calm down. Don't lose control of your chakra or your senses. That will only make this situation worse. We're ninja, remember, and we have to look underneath the underneath. There is a way out of this situation, no matter how bleak it looks right now. We're the proud village of Konoha, remember, and we're all in this together. We're not about to let you run off on your own in this crisis, we need to work as a team. She explained. Kanahaji bit her lip, before looking at the reassuring smiles that ran through the faces of her friends. They were in this together, Kanahaji realized, and they would fight together for their village. You're right everyone, we can get through this if we work together. There are certain things we must take care of first, such as finding my father. He'll know what to do, she said. Her friends nodded in agreement to the sound plan. We're behind you all the way, Kanahaji, said Nikukyu, to which Kanahaji smiled softly again. Naruto looked out over the village, smiling madly as his army had reduced the bustling village to a cacophony of chaos in a mere 2 minutes. The Shinigami patrolling the village had already been killed under the onslaught of numbers, and it would be a while before they could get anyone stronger out here. But still, they had limited time to fulfill the requirements, but his army was performing surprisingly well given the circumstances. Ulquiorra and some of the others he had appointed high positions were there to severely punish those who broke the rules and ate. The bracelets were working wonders in this situation, and he sat back and enjoyed himself as he watched Grimjow chain a family of 5, cackling all the way, as he punched out the father who was foolishly trying to defend his family. The Arrancar sat down on the shingles of a roof, watching his army haphazardly throw unconscious humans into a messy pile near the center of the village. Several of them were bruised and beaten already, but as long as they were alive it didn't really matter. He laughed as he saw an ANBU squad attempt to drive his army away from the pile so they could rescue the citizens, but they were quickly repelled. He winced mockingly as a young child got trampled by the wave of panicking villagers. Surely, there would at least be a few ones that died here and there. The kid's head was crushed underneath the boot of a much larger man with a heavy footfall. A few hollows laughed as some civilians stared in horror, though the large man didn't even pay attention to any of that. While this operation would be considered a disgusting crime against humanity to nearly everyone, Naruto saw it as the most beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. Seeing every last man, woman, and child in Konoha being chained by his army, where they would later be escorted to Hueco-Mundo. He had something so brutal in store for them there that he would hold off his climax until then. The fact that his armies were brutalizing them right now on his orders were mere peanuts. The kid's death was insignificant, and the screaming and begging of the villagers to stop didn't matter to him. He was controlling his joy right now, trying to mask the fact that he just wanted to jump for joy right about now. Well, I guess it's about time for me to get in on this action, too. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I let all these opportunities pass me by. Naruto said, rising to his feet as if it was just another day at the store for him. He brushed off his brown robe, before he set his eyes on the Hokage mansion. Perfect, his target was already out and about, surveying the destruction of his village in horror from the balcony in his office. He also seemed to be barking orders to ANBU guards, who activated their Kyuubi state and rushed down towards the village below. You call that usage of the Kyuubi's chakra? And here I thought Danzu's research would come up with something a little more fruitful. Though, I guess it was enough to conquer this pathetic continent. Naruto thought to himself, seeing how the ANBU had only mastered a whopping one tael's worth of power. Oh, hello. What's this? He asked himself, as he witnessed a group of 7 teenagers appear in a flash on the roof. They seemed to be searching for the Hokage, but Naruto's attention was drawn on the one at the head of the pack. Oh, hell no. What the fuck, he hissed, seeing the girl's startling resemblance to his old Orioke form. She even had blue eyes, and there were even 2 cute little whisker marks on her young cheeks. Maybe some of his genetic material had been donated to those with a particularly strong reaction to the chakra, though whether that was the case Naruto didn't know. She looks almost exactly like me, and because of that she's probably extra talented with the Kyuubi chakra or some shit like that. Not to mention, those brats behind look almost exactly like my old friends. This is a bad joke, and whoever came up with this stupid idea needs to die. His appearance on the shingles of the roof on the floor directly below the balcony, able to catch a glimpse of his targets from that angle. He fidgeted with the bracelets he had around his waist, itching to get in on some of the action. The Hokage had his back facing him, and he seemed to be addressing the 7 teenagers. He even adopted a neutral, detached expression, though even Naruto with his lack of empathy could figure out that he was just hiding his true feelings behind a mask of stoicism. Dad, what are you doing here? Can't you see the village is under attack? Shouldn't you be giving orders to evacuate the civilians? Kanahaji screamed, to which Naruto scoffed. What did they take him for? That force field did more than just make them visible. Kanahaji. Daisuke croaked back. Why are you here? He seemed to be in too much shock to anything, possibly from the relief that his precious daughter was still alive. Why am I here? I'm here because I'm worried about the village. Konoha can't be destroyed like this, we can't die by this, can we? She asked, the pride in her village resurfacing towards her voice. Kanahaji, look around you. There's a giant barrier of chakra that's surrounding the village, preventing our civilians' escape. Our ninja are taking the attack to these strange beasts, but even the Kyuubi's chakra isn't doing a thing to them. I'm afraid to say that we may be over our heads on this one. He sighed, much to the shock of the kids after hearing such cowardly words come from their Hokage. Kanahaji clenched her fists together and stared at the ground. Her cheeks were tinted red, though it was probably out of anger rather than embarrassment. She was definitely disappointed in her father for saying that. Wow, I never realized the Hokage of Konoha was such a pussy. Oh well, it's just one thing on the laundry list of reasons why I hate this village. Naruto mused to himself, not voicing his thoughts out loud. How can you say that? Have you lost so much pride just in the face of danger that you have forgotten everything that Konoha represents? The will of fire, have you forgotten about that too? The sense of unity that everyone has within the village. We're responsible for them. I'm not gonna run away and turn my back on them, and I'm not gonna go back on my word. Because that is my nindo, she cried, pouring her heart out to the sky. Tears were beginning to settle in her eyes, as she looked once again at the chaos that had descended on the village. It was a grisly scene, to be sure, and Kanahaji's heart poured out towards those who may have already lost their lives. Kanahaji, whispered Nikukyu. Oh, fuck no. Naruto thought. That bitch is dead. Daisuke glanced at his daughter with a compassionate look on his face, not as the 17th Hokage, not as a member of the Shimura clan, but as a father. A look of regret passed over his face, before he walked up to the crying girl and hugged her tightly. "It's okay, baby. I know how hard it must be for you to see the village in such a terrible state. You, more than anyone else, love this village, and it would tear you apart to see it destroyed. You're right, Kanahachi, absolutely right. This is no time to be wallowing in hopelessness. We need to pool our minds together and find a way out of this situation," he said, and the 6 teenagers around them joined their friend in a group hug. "But, first," he said, taking on a much more intense tone of voice as he broke the hug. "Why don't you stop hiding and show yourself," he said. His daughter wiped her tears, and glared intently over the balcony, having sensed the presence a while ago. He had been waiting for one of the creatures to show up here, but he didn't think that they had the intelligence for subtly. This one could be even more dangerous than the others. There was a flash of something, and the group of 8's eyes widened as a young man that couldn't be over 16 appeared right before, the psychotic grin on his face unnerving. His dress was very odd to the group, being garbed in a tattered brown robe that was a little too big for him. There seemed to be a sword strapped on his hip. But what was really alluring was his face, having this strange, white thing that covered part of his face and the war paint on his cheeks. Honestly, to the group the boy didn't look human. "Are you gonna show another display of crying again? Because that bitch's misery over there was really amusing to me. All that crap about, oh, it's my Nindo, and oh, this village is so awesome," while bawling her eyes out like a baby, he yelled, performing a crude imitation of Kanahachi's voice when the need arose. The hate that was rising out of the people in front of him almost made him moan, and he lapped it all up. "Who are you?" asked the Hokage. "Me? Oh, I'm just a lil ol' errand car who was walking along the beaten path, and it just so happens I stumbled across this backwater little village. So, I think to myself." He placed his hand underneath his chin in a mock thinking pose. "Hey, I should use my armies to crush this place into the dust. So, here we are now, and if it's any indication, you seem to be getting crushed," he said. "Armies? You mean you're the one behind all this?" accused Kanahachi, her voice shaking in anger. "Do I have to spell it out for you idiots? Yes, I'm that one that brought these hollows to these pitiful little village, and I'm not leaving until I see it completely leveled." There it was again, that beautiful hatred that Naruto loved so much. "But, of course, I'm not going to be satisfied just by killing you. No, I have something else much worse in mind for this miserable little village, something so bad that you'll all be wailing for death at the end of it," he guffawed. Kanahachi almost darted forward to attack the errand car, but she was held back by her father. "How? How could you be so depraved? You want to torture every person in this village? Even civilians? Even women and children? Are you really that big of a monster?" she said, shaking in her father's grasp. Naruto shut his eyes and gave her a lazy grin as he blew her off, though the girl's father spoke up next with something that would anger Naruto quite significantly. "What I want to know is how a child like you manages to control a massive hordes of these things. If anything, I'm calling your bluff out right now," he said calmly, unconvinced that someone like Naruto could control this massive horde of creatures. Naruto blinked. He did not just say that. "Listen, bitch," he began, insulting the Hokage, to which all the kids around him bristled. "I don't give a fuck what you think about me controlling these hollows, but that isn't going to save your village, is it? You will be enslaved, you will be taken back into Huecomundo, and you will be tortured for my own personal amusement. And, as for you, there's something about you personally that sets my hair on edge. You remind me too much of that damnable old bastard Danzu," he muttered. Daisuke's eyes widened. "How do you know that name?" Daisuke shouted. Kanahachi's eyes widened along with her friends. The way he was talking about Danza made it seem like this kid once knew him. But that was impossible. Naruto grinned, and Kanahachi felt a rock drop into her stomach. She peered at him carefully, peeling away the bizarre mask and inhuman features. His appearance reminded her of someone. He was our ancestor, the greatest Hokage known to the village, who provided us with our own Kyuubi chakra. Daisuke continued, breaking the silence. Kanahaji remained quiet, though she appeared to be shaking, but in fear, wonder or anger no one knew. Figures he would cover an incident like that up. Tell me, have you ever wondered where he managed to get that Kyuubi chakra in the first place, Naruto asked. What are you? Kanahaji started, but a sudden pressure overcame her, taking the words from her mouth and forcing her to her knees. She looked up at the creature in front of her, seeing him coated in an orange layer or an energy that wasn't chakra. In the background, she saw a silhouette of what appeared to be a fox head. Allow me to introduce myself. Naruto Uzumaki, Emperor of the Rino animal in Huecomundo, an original Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yuko. Pleased to make your acquaintance, he said, bowing mockingly to the group. Oh. Original Jinchuriki? Kanahaji asked, losing her rigid stance as she pondered the exact meaning of those words. You mean, but that's impossible. You don't look any older than I do, she yelled at Naruto. The Arrancar looked at her oddly, before he laughed. Ironic, isn't it? I died here over 200 years ago, protecting this village while its people provided me with nothing in return. And then, that bastard ancestor of yours had the gall to experiment on my corpse and find the secret of the Kyuubi chakra in order to mass-produce walking shitstains like you. Kind of funny, don't you think, he said, letting his Ryatsu diminish into nothing. Dead? Kanahaji replied, turning white as a sheet as her phobia kicked in. So? That means you're she stammered, as she pointed a trembling finger at Naruto. Naruto grinned. Boo! Kanahaji screamed. Kanahaji! Don't let his lies get to you. This kid is not from the 6th Hokage's time period, nor is he a ghost. This kid obviously has some sort of Kekai Genkai, one that's disposition toward Genjutsu. He is merely toying with you, her father shouted, drawing her from her reverie. Oh, do you want to see if I'm really toying with you, ho? Ji-sama, Naruto drawled, drawing out every syllable as long as he could. Or is de whittle boy too scared he's gonna get out? He mocked using baby talk, making kissy faces at the group. That appeared to do it for Shimura Daisuke, as the others stared at him as he began to draw on the legendary Kyuubi's chakra. His nails lengthened into claws, his eyes turned red and slitted, and faint whisker marks appeared on his cheeks. A vicious red chakra surrounded his body in the shape of a fox, forming a cloak of sorts with one tail at the end. One-tailed state, huh? Naruto commented, and the Hokage narrowed his eyes further. You made a big mistake in targeting Konoha, boy. I've had enough of these conversations with you, and I'm not going to let you fulfill your twisted desires any longer. The will of fire burns in all of us in Konoha, and you will never take that away from us. I am the 17th Hokage, and I have inherited the will of fire from those that came before me. As long as I'm here, you will never shake the foundation that is Konoha, he roared. Naruto yawned before grinning and reaching his hand towards his sword. He grasped the hilt of his zanpakuto tightly as he charged up his Ryatsu. He drew the cutlass slowly and held it at arm's length, pointing the bladed edge of the sword at the Hokage. The gleaming cutlass seemed to draw the attention of the 7 teenagers, having never seen a weapon quite like it before. He looked towards the sky, his eyes spacing out as he disregarded all the shinobi in front of him. Shall we get this over with? I've been wanting to satiate my bloodlust for a very long time, you know. And, don't worry about anything when you lose, I've got a very special bracelet with your name on it. He said, taking one of the bracelets off his belt and holding it up. Those are. Kanahaki thought, looking at the bracelet carefully. Dad, those awful bracelets are what the creatures are using to capture the civilians around the village. They seem to have some important purpose, but I can't figure it out. Kanahaji piped up, and her father nodded. Stand back, you guys. I can't let you get in on this mess while on my watch," he said. Kanahaji looked like she was about to protest vibrantly, but her friend Rei placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on Kanahaji, let's stand back and let Daisuke-sama deal with this. He's our Hokage, after all," she said reassuringly, which slightly calmed down Kanahaji. "Yeah, there's no way Hokage-sama could ever lose. I bet he'll send this kid packing within seconds. You more than anyone should know just how strong he is," Nikukyu piped up. Kanahaji smiled at the reassurance, stepping back a safe distance so she wouldn't get caught up in the fight. "You can do it, Daddy. Show him what the village of Konoha is made of," she cheered from afar. Souped up on Kyubi chakra, Daisuke rushed over to the side, going for a more subtle angle where he could attack. This would be a perfect feint attack to catch his opponent off guard, and then he would go in for the actual kill. He began some hand seals for a special Shimura clan jutsu, and he never knew what hit him. His hands flopped uselessly to his sides, and he didn't even have time to perform a kawarimi which he could use to avoid the attack. It was just so fast that Daisuke had never seen anything like it. It was beyond Shinobi level speed, to the point where it looked like he had just appeared out of nowhere and attacked him. He wasn't even able to react. It wasn't like he was an incompetent Hokage or anything. He had mastered all levels of Shimura clan jutsu, to the point of being able to summon the Baku, and he had mastered the usage of the Kyubi's chakra, which he hadn't used much in his fight. This thing had outclassed him in every way. This thing was no human. A heavy gash coated the right side of his chest where the creature had sliced him, and he fell to the ground in a heavy thud. Naruto was standing around 5 feet away with his back turned to the downed Hokage. He licked the blood off his sword before sheathing it, before turned around and slowly walked towards the Hokage, holding up the bracelet ominously. The last thing Daisuke remembered was his arm being forced into that thing before it activated, and he lost consciousness. Naruto turned back towards the 7 teenagers who were standing around 50 feet away on the other side of the balcony. Their mouths were all agape, and they seemed to be in too much shock to even move. It made sense, the Hokage was pretty much infallible, and to lose them pretty much meant that we're fucked. Most of them seemed to realize that at least. The anticlimactic, one-sided battle may not have helped. And then, Kanahaji moved while her friends seemed to be in too much shock to do anything. She screamed in anger and sorrow as she buffeted towards the monster who had attacked her father, 6 tails of red chakra flowing behind her. She was fully intent on ripping that creature's throat out, making him eat it and then shit it out. "I'll kill him. I'll kill him," she screamed in her thoughts, as pure hatred and anger fueled her chakra and willed her body to move towards the Eren car. She was almost there, hand at the ready. She aimed it towards his jugular, and noticed the smug smile on his face. She would wipe that grin off his face. She would. Slash! Thump! The 15-year-old girl slumped to the ground defeated, her Kyubi cloak armor being no match for the Ryatsu-tempered sword that had slashed through her right shoulder. She looked up at Naruto, who was glaring down at her like some fierce god. He released his Ryatsu slightly, which shaded his red eyes from view and gave him a more intimidating feel. He reached onto his belt and pulled out another bracelet, and time slowed to a crawl as the girl anticipated her fate. "Monster!" She croaked out, her voice a low, fearful whimper now as tears flowed from her eyes. Mercy was given to her for the time being as she too lost consciousness as the bracelet was attached to her. Naruto hoisted the unconscious girl to her feet by her right arm, before cruelly tossing her over to where her father lay. The treatment of their friend seemed to shock the others out of their stupor, but before they could even think about becoming enraged they too were slashed to pieces and captured. He looked at his own pile of the 8 people he had captured, before looking out across the balcony. It seemed that his forces were finishing up, rounding up a few stragglers that had managed to escape them for a surprising amount of time. There came a flash from someone behind him, but he immediately recognized the Ryatsu. He hoped that this individual had now fully completed the tasks he had given him.
Ulquiorra, I take it you've done your fair share of the work here?" he asked.
Yes, Naruto. I have personally taken to capturing quite a few of the humans. But that's not what's important right now. My forces have finished rounding up every human in the northern sector of Konoha, and both Grimmjow and Neutra will be finished with theirs in less than 5 minutes, he reported. That's good. We're making almost perfect time, so I guess I can send the signal to sail at this moment. He explained, before his finger began to glow a bright red. He pointed the Ryatsu glowing finger towards the sky, before firing a burst of the energy which crackled in midair before exploding into a brilliant display of red and orange. There, Sail should easily be able to see that flare on his monitor. Setting up the mass Garganta shouldn't take him very long at all, since they've already had this prepared before the invasion. Are all the Shinigami dead? He asked. Yes, they stood no chance for this massive amount of hollows that flooded the village. There were 15 of them patrolling the village, 5 of which were seated officers within their division. Their bodies have all been accounted for. Good, but Soul Society has probably picked up these signals by now. It won't be long before they react accordingly, and at this rate it may be half of their forces. That is why I've decided to leave the rest of the continent alone. We simply don't have the time to go and crush all these villages, and with the power vacuum created by Konoha's sudden absence, they'll probably destroy themselves within a few years anyway. The elemental countries weren't exactly known for their peace-loving qualities. Even Konoha, who had preached a message akin to that for its early years, was always a little trigger-happy. I understand, Naruto. I will order my forces to cease their attacks, said Ulquiorra before there was a loud, whirring noise that covered the entire village. The blue force field that surrounded the village distorted slightly, before flickering back into existence. Naruto grinned. Well, that was even quicker than I expected, he said happily, as a rift in the space began to open. The rift widened to almost a 5-mile radius, large enough to engulf the entire village in its embrace. Naruto saw the black space start to close around him, the hollows, and all the humans who had been converted into Konpaku form by the bracelets. Looks like you won't need to order them to do anything, Ulquiorra. We're on our way back already, and we've got company in tow with us. I just hope this influx of humans will keep Hueco stable. I'm sure we don't have to worry about that, Naruto-sama, said Ulquiorra, reverting back to the honorific as he, Naruto, and every life form in the entire village was engulfed by the Garganta. When the rift in space closed and the Garganta disappeared, all that was left was a ramshackle, burning village. The once great village, and capital of the Shinobi world, was now a simple ghost town, a shadow of its former self. No one resided within those walls, and for the next few days the people of the elemental countries were baffled at the sudden disappearance of the most powerful ninja state that had ever existed. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.